hybrid individual is the individual that carries different pair of genes. One is dominant and the other is recessive, while pure individual is the individual that carries similar pairs of genes, either dominant or of recessive type. You have to remember that dominant gene prevents the appearance of the effect of the other gene, and the recessive trait must be always pure. And to illustrate it or to explain it widely, if we suppose an example of inheriting a definite trait such as the trait of eyes color from parents to their child. Here, if the father transfers the gene of brown colored eyes to his child and the mother transfers the gene of green colored eyes to her child, then both of these genes are gathered in the zygote. They will be different genes. One of them expresses a trait of brown eyes and the other expresses the trait of green eyes. So, what will be the color of the eyes of the child? Will they be green in color or brown in color? Actually, in this case, the child's eyes will be brown, and that is because the gene of brown eyes will be the one with the stronger effect, or it will dominate over the other gene, and the trait will be appeared on your body, which is the brown colored eyes. And in this case, the trait that this gene represents, which has the stronger effect on your body, is called dominant trait, and it's said to be hybrid in this case. And the dominant or hybrid dominant trait is occurred when the two genes which represent definite trait are of two different types, just as in this case, one of the genes which represent the trait are of brown colored eyes and the other represent green colored eyes. Those two different genes make the dominant trait to be hybrid one. But what about the other gene which represent the green colored eyes, which had no effect on your body? Actually, the gene of green eyes in this case represents a trait called recessive trait. The only way to appear or to make the recessive trait appears is when the two genes which are responsible to appear such a trait or to represent such a trait are similar. So, dominant gene prevent the appearance of the effect of the other gene, and to appear the recessive trait, their genes must be similar, and the trait of recessive the type of recessive must be pure. Now, you have to remember that dominant trait may be pure or hybrid. If the genes that represent such a trait are similar, it will be a dominant trait, pure dominant trait. If the genes which represent such a trait are different, this trait will be a hybrid dominant trait. And to illustrate the genes of a dominant trait, we must represent them by using a capital letters. But in the case of recessive trait, the recessive trait always pure, and it must be represented by a small letter. So, dominant trait may be pure, may be hybrid, while recessive trait always pure. Now, the law of segregation of factors, or Mendel's first law, says when two individuals of any pair of hereditary traits are different from each other's mate, only the dominant trait appears in the first generation, while the two traits appear in the second generation in a ratio 3 dominant to 1 recessive. Here is an example to illustrate inheritance of the trait of the color of the flowers between purple flower and white flower. As we can see, only the purple flower trait appears in all individuals of the first generation. Then the other trait start appearing in the second generation with a ratio 3 purple flowers to 1 white flower, which means 3/4 of the plants that were growing in the second generation were purple in color, while quarter of these plants were white in color. Now I have a problem to you, and I will leave this problem to you to get the solution. And this problem says that we have two pea plants, one with tall stem and the other with short stem. And you must know that the tall stem, which is the dominant trait, is pure in this case. When those two plants are crossed, what will be the genotype? Means the structure of the genes. What will be the genotype of the parent cells or the gametes or the offspring? I'm waiting for your answer. We have another problem, but this problem we will solve it together. The problem says, in pea plant, what are the results of self-pollination of tall hybrid plant by using the samples? The symbols here represent the genes. T capital represents the gene of the dominant trait, while T small represents the gene from the recessive trait. And while you're solving the problem, you have to show the genotype means the structure of the genes of the parent cells, gametes, and offspring. Let us solve this problem together. First, you will write the genotype of the parent cell. And as long as in our problem he said that the parent cells or the parents are of the same type, which is hybrid tall plants, hybrid means that the two genes which represent such a trait must be different. So one of them is written in a capital form from the dominant trait, and the other one will be written from in a letter form from the recessive trait. So the genotype of the parent cell will be T capital, T small, and that of the other cell will be T capital, T small. And then these parents produce gametes. And as you know, in gametes, these two genes got separated. So inside each cell of the gamete, the trait is represented by only one gene. So T capital, T small will be separated into two cells of gametes, T capital in a cell and the T small will be written in another cell. So each parent cell is divided into two gametes, and each gene of the two genes of the trait will be separated into two different cells in the gametes, and the other parent cell will undergo the same process. And then the gametes are produced, as you can see. Then those gametes are paired together, forming the first generation or the individual of the first generation, whose genotype will be T capital T small, T capital T small, T capital T small, T small, T small. So in the first generation we can see that 3/4 of the produced individuals have the dominant trait with tall stem of such a plant, which is the tall stem, and the 1/4 of the produced individuals carry the recessive trait, which is short stem, and How can we identify the recessive trait? We identify the recessive trait from its genotype, as the genes of recessive traits must be written in small form and they must be similar. So T small and T small. This will be the genotype of the genes which represent the recessive trait.